Welcome back to theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Again, that website address is theclinicaltrialsguru.com. I'm joined once again by our most popular guest, one of our most popular guests ever, Mr. Darshan Kulkarni. And Darshan, I mean, he's doing so many different things. It's so hard to get a hold of him to get him on the show, but he's been so generous with his time to come on consistently. And we've been doing this about once a month now, Darshan, for quite a while.
Mhm.
And needless to say, our interviews are amongst the most popular that I have on there because people are interested in hearing an attorney's perspective on clinical trials, and that's a good way to introduce Darshan. He is an attorney focusing on pharmaceutical law, so that entails everything from sales, marketing, research development, strategies. I mean, he's done all kinds of things.
Mhm.
And he's also a pharmacist, which comes in handy when we're talking about the specific molecular pathways of some of these drugs, or we may be talking about generic drugs, or like we just did, comparative effective research. His pharmaceutical background really comes into play there because he can tell you kind of everything you need to know from a clinical perspective as well as from a legal perspective. With that being said, this is not medical advice. This is not legal advice. If you are having a legal dilemma, you should contact an attorney, preferably Darshan himself,
Mhm.
right? Are you taking new clients?
Always.
Always. So preferably Darshan. And if you have medical issues, obviously contact your doctor or your medical provider. This is a Google Hangout, people, right? This is not an emergency room. But anyways, we will be talking about something that's somewhat of an emergency, speaking of emergencies for clinical trials, and that's the Sunshine Act.
Mhm.
And I'll get into it later on, but I'll let Darshan introduce what the Sunshine Act is, and I'll tell you why a lot of sites are thinking this is an emergency.
Thanks for having me on again, Dan. It's always a pleasure being here. And your blog is very, very popular. When I talk to a lot of my friends and clients, they're always talking about stuff they saw on your blog. So it's always a pleasure to be on there.
Thank you,
Um,
Darshan.
Always. The thing I want to talk about the Sunshine Act is that it's become very, very important. And I've gotten phone calls about this, so I thought it's always a good idea to raise awareness. The Sunshine Act is, to put it very simply, the Sunshine Act is a mechanism where there is increased transparency. There's a whole push out there saying, we believe that doctors are influenced by pharmaceutical companies, and since they're influenced by pharmaceutical companies, we don't trust that doctors are prescribing or acting in our best interest. This is what a lot of patients believe, or this is what that's a lot of people in government believe. So to address that, to increase transparency, the Sunshine Act came about. And what it basically says is that if you're paying a doctor more than $10 at a time or $100 in aggregate over the course of a year, you being a pharmaceutical company, that needs to be disclosed. And the word doctor is defined, and what needs to be disclosed is defined, and how it needs to be disclosed is defined. But the reason it applies to clinical trials is because not all work that doctors do for pharma is bad. Sometimes it's really, really good. Doing research is one of those things, and sites do this research. And it's become an issue because sites land up bearing the brunt of reporting these numbers to pharmaceutical companies, contesting the numbers that pharmaceutical companies are putting out, deciding whether numbers should be put into advertising or into research buckets, and because you don't want doctors at research sites being accused of being biased, of being beholden to the needs of pharmaceutical companies and not the needs of their patients or subjects. And as both Dan and I know, a lot of doctors, if not most doctors, if not all doctors actually, are working in the best interest of their patients. And being sullied by words like they're not acting in their best interest is not something most doctors want to face. So it's important that they understand what the Sunshine Act is and how it impacts them. The Sunshine Act came about because of a few years ago, actually. Health and Human Services basically looked at what the FDA is doing and said, you guys have no way of evaluating whether these doctors are biased. So what do you find out? You find out that they recommended to the FDA that they need to have some kind of mechanism in place. Meanwhile, Congress goes out and says, we're going to create the Sunshine Act. We want to know how much doctors are being paid, how is that payment going to happen, who's going to pay whom, and how is that process being shown to the public. Health and Human Services put out a draft guidance, I want to say end of 2011. There was a lot of arguments as to what should be revealed, and not because it should be hidden, but because sometimes it's just private information. Sometimes it's not just the doctor's information, sometimes it's actually the doctors and the immediate family. So if the son works for a pharmaceutical company, are payments being made by the son to the father subject to disclosure? If the doctor is a principal investigator and has some kind of ownership in the pharmaceutical company, say it's a startup of some kind, does that doctor need to reveal that?
Mm-hmm.
Are questions that are being explored by Health and Human Services. The thing you also notice is that there were all these arguments, and then a few months ago, the final regulations came out, and they basically said that starting August of 2013, which is coming up very, very quickly, pharmaceutical companies need to start collecting numbers, and they will start being revealed over the course starting next year. If you're doing brand new research on a brand new drug, you can, as a pharmaceutical company, delay the release of this information for up to 4 years, which means that the salaries being paid to doctors can be withheld for a certain amount of time. But I know a lot of companies out there who are already looking at data mining this data. So there's this whole argument about fair market value. Well, now you can start looking at the Sunshine Act data and saying, well, Dr. X is doing research, and apparently he's getting paid so much at this other location, at this other site. Well, should Dr. Y also be getting paid about the same? You can start, if you're a pharmaceutical company who's trying to evaluate who is the leader in a certain field, all they have to look at is the Sunshine Act data to say, okay, company X, who's a leader in, say, cardiovascular health, looks to Dr. X for help in cardiovascular. They're the highest paying people there, which means that maybe we should be using him as well. So sites may actually start being involved in this process, because you may want to be one of those sites that's getting paid a lot of money, because it shows that you're heavily involved in research and you produce good results. So these are all the funny thing was, the Sunshine Act really comes not out of the FDA, but comes out of Health and Human Services.
Right.
But the FDA took this very seriously and released a guidance in February of 2013, which I think most people missed, actually, because that actually says that you need to be looking and revealing data to the FDA as well. And they need, so it puts the onus on physicians and sites to release certain data, which is in excess of what the Sunshine Act actually requires, to sponsors, so that they can do internal evaluations to reveal the data to the FDA. So sponsors will be having two separate sets of data, one for the FDA, one for Health and Human Services, though it comes from a central area.
Yet they're all public information for anyone to pick up. And I agree with the premise of the Sunshine Act, okay? I think most people would, okay? If you tell people we want disclosure and transparency, who's going to say no to that? Except some shady people, right?
But think about, well, you can call me shady, but as someone who represents a lot of clients, it's a lot of personal data. It's putting out someone's W-2, which on the face of it sounds, well, so what if you have nothing to hide? Well, I may not necessarily have anything to hide, but I still don't like people knowing how much I get paid.
No, what I was going to say, yeah, exactly. What I was saying is, on the surface, it seems like it's nice. Transparency, I mean, who doesn't want that, you know? But the problem is, and especially, I'm just going to speak from the clinical trials perspective, all right? You get these crazy bloggers, not me, but like these patient bloggers who are just getting nutty sometimes. And anytime anything's released to the public, they're going to look into it. And they're going to say, oh, this doctor at this research site made $2 million last year. Okay? Little do they know that that doctor, number one, does not own that company.
Hmm.
that where he is the principal investigator. So
Hmm.
that $2 million is not his. He
Hmm.
gets a salary, which is probably like $6,000 a month for
Okay.
doing research. So you
Right.
can see the discrepancy immediately.
Hmm.
People assume $2 million because that's what the Sunshine Act shows. It says Doctor XYZ
Hmm.
$2 million or 1 million or eight
Yeah.
hundred thousand, and at the end of the day, these doctors are not taking home this money. These most of these clinics, they're either academic institutions or they're run by corporations where sometimes the doctors are owners, but rarely are they ever the only owner. And
Hmm.
most of the time, they're not the owners. Like at South Coast Clinical Trials, none of our doctors are the owners, but
Hmm.
all of our PIs show up as having received all of our gross revenues. And I don't think that's fair for them. And I don't think it's fair for these extreme bloggers to go out and say, oh, look how much this guy's making. When in reality, we're paying them a salary, like probably 6,000 a month,
Hmm.
and we're paying overhead and hospital bed days and
Hmm.
all that stuff. None of that is taken into account. And I don't think the Sunshine Act is ever going to show net pay because that would just be too difficult. I mean, that's like something for the IRS to do. But that's where my problem with the Sunshine Act is, and then I also have a problem with the negotiating the contracts and the budgets from the sites and the drug companies because they
Hmm.
start using the Sunshine Act as an excuse for paying less, and where we used to be able to negotiate 4 years ago or 3 years ago, now they're just ending the negotiation by saying to comply with the Sunshine Act, and they actually put the full legal number of the Sunshine Act in there to make it seem official. We are not negotiating anymore. And it just ends it. I mean, there's no need for negotiation anymore.
So I would respond to both of those, Dan. Just so you know, the Sunshine Act does try to control the numbers allocated, and that's why it's critical that sites start looking at the numbers being associated with individual doctors. Don't let a sponsor bully you into saying that anything paid to the site is automatically assigned to the doctors. That shouldn't happen. And it's critical that a site take it on themselves to make sure that doesn't happen because the doctors are going to start saying, I don't want to be part of research. In fact, there's already,
Yeah,
you're seeing a lot of doctors saying that. I don't want numbers
right,
associated with my, I don't want to look like I'm in pharma's pocket.
right.
So the Sunshine Act is trying to take that into account, and there are certain regs behind it that they are looking at that. We'll see how it actually plays out because, as you pointed out, it's very difficult to get to the granular level that you need to be able to evaluate. In fact, the
Yeah,
Sunshine.
and then in this day and age where anyone can blog, it
Mhm.
doesn't take long for someone to Google the numbers from 2012 and post a ridiculous blog post
Right,
on whatever platform they're using,
right,
Tumblr, and say, "Oh, this doctor is like a millionaire
right,
off of research," when in reality, he or she's getting a salary and a
right.
pretty average salary at that.
The other thing I would also say is your second concern, which is sites who are experiencing sponsors basically saying, we have to comply with the Sunshine Act, so we aren't going to give you any money. The Sunshine Act doesn't actually put limits on how much you can pay people. The Sunshine Act only says that we will cause disclosure. And the funny thing is, and this is critical sites to realize um, it's interesting that when you look at the actual commentary that's put in there, the Health and Human Services is told that they should limit the amount of money being put in, or they should tell sites or doctors to say certain things. And HHS comes out and says we don't have the authority to cause doctors to do anything. These limits that we're posting, or these requirements that we're posting, are actually on sponsors, not on the physicians. So if a physician chooses not to comply in certain ways, that's on the physician. We don't actually control that under the Sunshine Act, which is kind of
Yeah,
interesting when you think about it. It doesn't limit how much a doctor can be paid. It doesn't limit what the doctor necessarily needs to disclose. So
yeah.
he has to make
And
it
I
explicit
think
that.
I think a lot of these people are confused, or they're just using it to their advantage when it comes to negotiating these budgets. I wish I can pull up the email.
Uh-huh.
I don't have it with me,
Mhm.
but it said something along the lines of to keep your site's costs in line with the average site costs for
Mhm.
this study. Negotiations will end here.
So that's where you start saying that's not the Sunshine Act. First of all, that's
I'm going to
that's the
start
False
saying that.
Claims Act.
No, that's when I tell them that here's Darshan's number, and if you don't want to call him, he'll call you.
Exactly, exactly. And then we start getting into, and there are ways to address that. How do you address fair market value is a topic by itself, and maybe then you and I need to talk about that because that'll help a lot of your clients. Having an argument over fair market value is it's a valuable argument to have. Sponsors do have a vested interest in making sure that sites are being paid fair market value, they aren't overpaying or underpaying, and that's kind of interesting when you realize that sites can't be underpaid because that also is evidence of being anti-competitive sometimes, sort of like being Walmart, if you will. So if you have a large enough site that keeps underbidding, what you land up with is them getting most of the research, which may cause other sites to shut down, and they be the only site. Right. It's not something you see very often. I don't.
No, I can assure you that does not happen in research. Right. It's the opposite.
Right. However, that remains a potential. So fair market value is playing in that bandwidth between overpayment and underpayment. Right. But the fact is that in the coming days, weeks, and months, we have to make sure that people don't use the Sunshine Act as an argument, as a bully tool. And you can actually look at evaluating fair market value and saying, I know you as a pharmaceutical company came up with this number, but it doesn't reflect my site's realities. And I'm sure you guys have a way of me, if I can justify these numbers, you guys should be able to accept them. And internal policies, justification profiles, something that shows how you came up to that number is often very, very useful. And when you talk to sponsors, they say that we actually have overrides in place as long as you can show me where these numbers came from. So we can have a different discussion on that, but just something.
Yeah, and as you can see, we can go on for hours about this, and we have other topics we will get to later.